All right, this is the first lecture dealing with the judicial branch. Today our focus is to make sure we understand the three different levels of the justice system. One point I want to make sure you understand is that this is going to talk about the federal justice system. We have a state level justice system that's organized exactly the same way. In other words, the three different levels of a district, we call that a county. The building next door to the high school is our county courthouse. That's the same as a district level. Then there's the appellate level, and then there's the Supreme Court level. You can see in the pyramid we've got the organization, and I use a pyramid because it works really well on two levels. The first is to show the hierarchy of power. Obviously the Supreme Court is the most powerful, so that's at the top, and the district court then is at the bottom. In addition, you can see by area that the district court has far more courts than the Supreme Court does. So we can use this visual representation to deal with it two ways. In addition, what we see is that we've got in the top left corner, every time that we flip slides, I will have it up there so you can see exactly which level we're on. Hey, miss, do you want to turn your cell phone into me? Thanks, buddy. All right, at the bottom is the district court. Our U.S. district courts have a specific role that they serve. This is where all trials are held. This is where they start. So what we have here is the things that you're used to seeing. In other words, this is where they determine is somebody innocent or guilty. This is the stuff that you're used to seeing on TV. There are 94 of these in the United States. The Congress has the authority to make more as needed, and this is going to obviously increase as population goes up. This has the most courts because every trial, or at least 99% of trials, are going to start here. Each state has at least one, and obviously just like proportional representation, the larger the state, the more courts they will have. They have what we call original jurisdiction. In other words, first jurisdiction. What you will see on this, through this PowerPoint, is you'll see a couple of terms come up, so you can see that we're going to have to identify different things for the test. One is going to be the different types of jurisdiction or authority. Original means first. So in other words, only the federal court has the witnesses and juries. This is the one that, this is the trial where you actually prove whether somebody did it or not. So everything that you're used to seeing, a judge, a jury, if you think law and order, all that kind of stuff, this is the trial that you think about. This is the court that you think about. The next level up is the appellate courts, and their job is to make sure things are fair. So their role is to look at the first trial and see if it was fair. In other words, a trial happens at the district court level. It is appealed up to the next level, and then the appeals court looks at it and says whether or not it's fair or not. What you can see then is automatically there are going to be fewer of these than there are district courts. The reason that there's fewer of these is because you're only going to appeal if you're found guilty. No one on earth is going to be like, oh, you found me innocent, I think I should try again and see if you can convict me. So automatically all of those cases are out. In addition, you have to have grounds for an appeal, and it can't just be that you don't like the ruling. It can't just be, well, I'm guilty, so that's wrong, you should rehear it. An appeal is simply requesting a change. In other words, what is the formal, what is the formal opinion of the jury? Can I have it looked at? This court has appellate jurisdiction. In other words, they have the authority to look at what another court heard and then to change it. There are 12 of these in the United States. You can see substantially less. They do not hold trials. In other words, they don't determine are you innocent or guilty. They don't hear witnesses. Most times at appeals courts, you won't even have the defendant there. You will just have attorneys because the defendant is in jail. So they're not necessarily going to even be at their appeals hearing. This is a map of the district courts. What you see is they're called circuits. The circuits are just an area that things travel around. You can see Minnesota is in the 8th District Circuit. There are a total of 12 of them. Now, what is the process? In other words, how do they go about appealing? What has to happen is 3 judges, minimum of 3, they always want an odd number so there's no tie, are going to look at the first case. They're going to hear all the transcripts, they're going to read about it all, and then they're going to hear arguments from both the judge that ruled on it, the prosecution, and the defense. And they're going to decide whether or not it was fair. There are 3 ways they can rule. The first is to uphold the verdict. If they uphold the verdict, then the defendant is still guilty. Obviously guilty because otherwise you wouldn't be at the appeal court. If you're innocent, you're not appealing that. So if they uphold the verdict, the defendant is still guilty. If they reverse the decision, then the defendant is now innocent. And it has to be innocent because The only reason they're appealing is because they were guilty. They don't reverse decisions a lot because courts don't like to do that. They don't like to tell the judge that they were completely wrong. This has to happen in something that's very, very egregious. The majority of the time, if they think the trial wasn't fair, they will remand the case. What that means is they just send it back and say, have a new trial. It's like a do-over. Again, the most important thing you remember on the appeals court is this. They do not decide innocent or guilt. They just decide, did the government do their job in holding a fair trial? Were all of your rights protected? And we haven't gone over the rights. That's something we'll deal with in the third unit in second semester. What that's really dealing with is the rights of the accused, these constitutional protections in the Bill of Rights and some of the amendments beyond. And the last is the Supreme Court. Their role is to be the finals appeal court. If you get tried in the the Dakota County Courthouse and are found guilty, you can appeal all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the odds of them hearing that case are really slim because they're very busy. There are thousands and thousands of cases who are submitted to the Supreme Court. They only have time to hear a small amount. And so what you're going to see is they're only going to hear cases that have constitutional importance or that deal with a lot of cases. In other words, it's going to set a precedent for a lot of people, or it has a lot of publicity around it. For example, this year our Supreme Court is going to hear cases dealing with gay marriage because it sets a precedent for a lot of states, it affects a huge number of people, and it has a lot of publicity around it. This appeals court then is just simply to have appellate jurisdiction over both the appeals courts and the district courts. Most of their decisions are going to deal with constitutionality, this idea of judicial review. What they're going to look at is, did the decision violate the U.S. Constitution? Is there some amendment, some right that was violated along with this? That's a case, for example, Roe versus Wade. What they looked at was abortion, but what they were really deciding is the right to privacy. Federal judges, how do they get their job? They're appointed. In other words, the president selects them and says, hey, I think this person would do a good job. If you remember looking back at Article 3, the scavenger hunt, there were no qualifications. There was no listing of you had to be this old, you had to be a citizen for this long. None of that applies. All that matters is that the president says you would do a good job. In theory, then, my son could be a Supreme Court justice. If that was the case, that would be embarrassing for our country because he's 3.5. Regardless, if the president appoints you and the Senate approves you, and that's the key thing, is the Senate has to approve you, well, then you get the job. Your term, then, how long you have the job, is for life. We do this on purpose. We want people who are in judge spots to be able to resist political power, to resist political will. For example, think about me as a teacher, me as a coach, or your parents. A lot of time our job is to make decisions you don't like. It's to say no to things. It's to deal with unpopular choices. That's really our job. And we need to feel protected in order to do that. In the case of a parent, it's the idea that, well, your kid should love you and eventually they'll grow up and pull their head out of their, well, you know. And then they'll realize that you were right about a lot of things, right? As a coach, when I deal with 50 kids, I have to cut kids. That's all there is to it. And so those are unpopular decisions. You have to do what's right for 50 kids, not what's right for just one of them. And so when we talk about politics, what we want is the judges to be fair, to say what is right for our country, not what's popular. They can only be removed by impeachment. Again, if we remember back, that means which House of Congress has to start it, the House, and then it's tried in the Senate. How many federal judges are there? Well, in the district courts, they have at least 2 judges per district court. At the appellate level, we have 6 to 27 judges per appeals district, and that number fluctuates. And then on the Supreme Court, currently we have 9 justices. You'll notice that we call judges at every level except for the Supreme Court. We call them justices. It's just a term of respect or reverence. Tomorrow, the game that you will be playing deals with this, making sure that you understand how this stuff fits. So hopefully you've taken good notes. Have a good night.